The basketball world couldn't look away from Caitlin Clark. Everyone from casual fans to hardened sports critics found themselves drawn into her story. What started as whispers of a talented college player had grown into full-blown nationwide excitement. People who had never watched women's basketball before were now planning their days around her games. It wasn't just that she was good. Plenty of players were good. Clark was different. She played with a confidence that made even the most impossible shots look easy, from half-court buzzer beaters to no-look passes that left defenders confused. She brought something special every time she stepped onto the court. During her college years, Clark broke record after record. Points scored, assists made, three-pointers hit. The record books needed constant updating. Sports channels began showing highlights from women's games that previously would have been lucky to get a 10-second mention. College arenas that once sat half-empty were suddenly sold out weeks in advance when Clark's team came to town. "Have you seen Clark play yet?" became a common question at offices and family gatherings across the country. People who couldn't tell you the rules of basketball were suddenly experts on her shooting form and court vision. When draft day finally arrived, there wasn't a shred of doubt about who would be picked first. The real question was how quickly she could change the professional game. Critics wondered if her style would translate. Some older commentators questioned whether she could handle the physical play of pro basketball. They didn't wonder for long. Into her first professional game, Clark scored 28 points with 8 assists. By her 5th game, she had her first triple-double. Television ratings doubled, then tripled when she played. Her jersey became the best-selling item in league history within weeks. Young girls showed up to games with Clark's number painted on, their faces wearing her signature shoes and carrying homemade signs. At ESPN headquarters in Bristol, the energy was electric. Executives who had long struggled to find ways to promote women's sports suddenly had a golden opportunity. And nobody was more excited than Stephen A. Smith. The network's most recognizable face, known for his loud opinions and even louder suits, had been watching Clark's rise with growing interest. Unlike some of his colleagues who jumped on the bandwagon, late Stephen A. had been talking about Clark since her sophomore year of college. "I've been in this business for decades," he often reminded people, "and I know star power when I see it." On a rainy Tuesday morning, Stephen A. walked into ESPN's main conference room for the weekly programming meeting. Producers, directors, and on-air talent filled the seats around a long table. Coffee cups and half-eaten donuts littered the surface. As everyone settled in, the network president stood at the front of the room, clicking through slides showing recent ratings. When he reached the slide about Clark's latest game, even he couldn't hide his smile. "These numbers are unprecedented," he said, pointing to a graph showing viewership that climbed higher with each game. "We've never seen anything like this for regular season games." Stephen A. nodded knowingly. He'd been pushing for more coverage of Clark since before she turned pro. While some colleagues thought he was exaggerating her impact, the numbers now proved him right. "I told y'all," he said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied grin. "This young lady isn't just playing basketball, she's changing how people see the entire sport." A few heads nodded in agreement, but Stephen A. noticed several others who seemed less enthusiastic. One analyst in particular, a former college player who'd been with the network for 3 years, rolled his eyes when he thought nobody was looking. Stephen A. made a mental note but continued his point. "We need to adjust our programming. More pre-game coverage, extended post-game analysis, special features on her training routine, her background, her family support system. The whole package," the network president agreed. "We're already planning to expand coverage. The audience clearly wants more Clark content." As the meeting wrapped up, producers broke into smaller groups to discuss specific shows. Stephen A. gathered with his first take team, including his co-hosts and the show's executive producer. "Listen up," he said, his voice carrying that trademark intensity fans loved. "She's changing the game, and we need to make sure we're giving the people what they want. I'm not talking about just mentioning her in passing. I want segments dedicated to analyzing her play, comparing her impact to other rookies in sports history, discussing how coaches are creating entirely new defensive schemes just to slow her down." The executive producer nodded. already making notes. We can rework tomorrow's rundown to lead with Clark's performance from tonight's game. Perfect, Stephen A. replied. And make sure we get those clips of her fourth quarter comeback ready to go. That behind-the-back pass she threw at Mo, the 3-minute mark? That's the kind of highlight that deserves the full Stephen A. treatment. The room laughed, familiar with his animated reactions to exceptional plays. After the meeting, Stephen A. stopped by the research department. 2 analysts were already pulling stats comparing Clark's first month as a pro to legends from both the women's and men's games. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Stephen A. said, looking over their shoulder at the impressive numbers. These comparisons are going to blow people's minds. What nobody realized yet was that not everyone at the network shared Stephen A.'s enthusiasm. Hidden beneath the excitement was a growing current of resentment that would soon bubble to the surface and threaten not just the network's coverage plans, but the very culture Stephen A. had helped build. Not everyone at ESPN shared Stephen A.'s excitement about Caitlin Clark. While most of the network buzzed with ideas for special segments and features, one analyst in particular sat quietly fuming. In his office, Tom Wilson had joined ESPN 3 years ago after a decent but forgettable college basketball career. He'd never quite made it to the pros despite years of trying, eventually settling for a sports broadcasting job that let him stay connected to the game he loved but couldn't conquer. His hiring at ESPN had been his big break, and he'd quickly built a reputation for hot takes and controversial opinions that got people talking. Before Clark came along, Tom had been gaining traction. His segment viewership was growing. Social media mentioned him more often, and he'd even been approached about writing a book. But now, it seemed like nobody wanted to talk about anything except Clark. His segments got pushed back in the schedule. His opinions mattered less, and even his agent had stopped calling as frequently. The morning after the programming meeting, Tom walked into the break room to find a group of producers huddled around someone's phone, watching Clark highlights from the previous night. "Did you see that pass in the third quarter?" one of them asked, rewinding the clip. "No one else in. The league can make that play. That's the 5th straight game she's put up over 25 points, another added. She's not just good for a rookie. She's already one of the best players in the league. Tom poured himself coffee and listened with growing irritation. "You guys act like she invented basketball," he finally said, unable to hold back. "There were great players before her, you know." The room went quiet. One of the producers cleared his throat. "Nobody's saying there weren't, but you have to admit what she's doing is special." "Special for women's basketball, sure," Tom said with a shrug. "But let's keep some perspective." He walked out, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind him. Throughout the day, his mood darkened as he passed monitors showing Clark highlights, heard colleagues pitching Clark-centered stories, and noticed the marketing team discussing new Clark-themed promotional ideas. During a production meeting for the evening show, Tom sat with his arms crossed as the executive producer laid out the rundown. "We'll open with 10 minutes on Clark's performance last night, then transition to how opposing teams are trying to create defensive schemes specifically to stop her." 10 minutes? Tom interrupted. "We're giving 10 minutes to a regular season game in May?" The producer looked up surprised. "Did you see the game? She had 36 points and made that incredible fourth quarter comeback." "Yeah, I saw it," Tom replied. "But we're acting like it's Game 7 of the finals. Shouldn't we be covering other stories too? The playoffs are coming up. Trade rumors are starting. There's actual news happening." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The producer tapped her pen against her notepad. "The ratings don't lie," she said finally. "Clark segments are what viewers want to see. So we're just chasing clicks now? What happened to actual sports analysis?" Tom's voice had risen enough that heads turned from nearby desks. After the meeting, a colleague named Jeff caught up with Tom in the hallway. "Hey, you okay? You seemed pretty heated in there." Tom tried to brush it off. "I'm fine, just tired of the non-stop Clark show." Jeff studied him for a moment. "Look, I get it, but this is how the business works. When someone's hot, they get coverage." "It's different this time," Tom insisted. "The network is going overboard. Stephen A. acts like she's the second coming of basketball Jesus." Maybe dial it back a bit in meetings, Jeff suggested. People are starting to notice. But Tom couldn't dial it back. Each day, as Clark's star rose higher, his frustration grew deeper. What burned him most was how easy it had been for her. While he'd spent years fighting for every small opportunity, doors seemed to magically open for her. The following week, Tom was scheduled to appear on a panel discussing the league's most improved players. The topic shifted to rookies and inevitably to Clark. "What's your take on her impact so far?" the host asked Tom. He took a deep breath, trying to sound professional. "Look, she's a good player having a good start. But the hype machine is out of control. We've seen promising rookies before. Let's wait until she's proven herself over a few seasons before we start rewriting the history books." The other panelists exchanged glances, but the numbers suggest she's already having a historic impact, one countered. Attendance is up 40% when she plays. Merchandise sales have broken records, and her statistical performance is unprecedented for a rookie. "Numbers can be manipulated," Tom replied. "And let's be honest, a lot of this attention isn't just about basketball. It's about marketing, about creating a story that sells. If she didn't have the look, the background, the whole package, would we care this much? I doubt it." There was an awkward pause before the host quickly moved to another topic. After the show, Tom's phone buzzed with a text from his producer. "Executive producer wants to see you tomorrow morning." He knew he'd pushed too far, but couldn't bring himself to care. In his mind, he was just saying what others were thinking but were too afraid to say out loud. What Tom didn't realize was that Stephen A. Smith had been watching the segment from his office, and Stephen A. was not pleased with what he'd heard. The morning of the First Take broadcast started like any other. The production team bustled around the studio, checking lights and sound levels. Makeup artists touched up the hosts' faces while producers reviewed the day's topics. Coffee cups littered every flat surface as the staff prepared for another high-energy show. Stephen A. arrived 15 minutes early, as usual. Dressed in one of his signature colorful suits, he reviewed his notes while the audio team clipped on his microphone. The show's co-host was already seated, scrolling through his phone for last-minute updates on the day's sports news. From across the room, Stephen A. spotted Tom Wilson walking onto the set. He noticed Tom looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept well. Stephen A. gave him a professional nod but kept his distance. The tension from yesterday's panel discussion still lingered in the air. "All right, people, we're live in 5 minutes," the director called. "Out. First segment is Caitlin Clark's record-breaking night and what it means for the league. Stephen A. will lead, followed by responses from the panel." Tom's jaw tightened at the mention of Clark, but he took his seat without comment. As the countdown began, the floor manager signaled the hosts to get ready. The familiar First Take theme music played through the studio speakers, cameras panned across the desk, and suddenly they were live to millions of viewers across the country. "Good morning and welcome to First Take," Stephen A. began with his trademark enthusiasm. "We're coming to you on what can only be described as a historic day for basketball. Last night, rookie sensation Caitlin Clark didn't just break the single-game assist record. She shattered it with 19 assists while adding 32 points. "We're witnessing greatness, folks." The studio audience applauded as highlight clips played on the screens behind the hosts. Stephen A. continued his analysis, breaking down key moments from the game with the passionate delivery that had made him famous. "What we're seeing," he said, leaning forward in his chair, "is not just a great player. We're seeing someone who is transforming how the game is played. The vision, the basketball IQ, the ability to make everyone around her better. These are the marks of a truly transcendent talent." The co-host agreed, adding his own observations about how opposing teams were struggling to develop defensive strategies against Clark's unique playing style. Then it was Tom's turn. "Tom, you've been closely watching Clark's development this season. What stood out to you about last night's performance?" the co-host asked. Tom cleared his throat. He had been told by producers to keep his comments balanced, but something inside him had reached a breaking point. Months of feeling overlooked, of watching his career stall while Clark dominated every headline. It all boiled over in that moment. "Look," he began, his voice carrying an edge that immediately caught Stephen A.'s attention. "I think we need to put things in perspective here. Yes, she had a good game. Yes, she's a good player. But this non-stop worship has gone too far. The studio fell silent. A producer in the control room sat up straight, immediately sensing trouble. "What exactly do you mean by worship?" the co-host asked cautiously. "I mean this network and others are acting like she's revolutionizing basketball. She's not. She's a rookie having a good streak, playing against competition that, let's be honest, isn't exactly the highest level." Stephen A's eyes narrowed. He started to interject, but Tom continued, his words coming faster now. "I'm just tired of the constant hype machine. Every show, every segment, it's all Clark, all the time. There are veterans in the league who've been putting up solid numbers for years who never got a fraction of this attention. That's because they never put up these kinds of numbers." Stephen A cut in sharply. "Come on," Tom shot back. "We all know what's really happening here. She's getting opportunities and attention that better players never got. Let's be honest about why. It's not just about basketball. It's about marketability. It's about the story. It's about what sells." The co-host's eyes widened in alarm. Stephen A sat up straight, his body language changing from professional disagreement to something much more serious. "Are you suggesting her success isn't legitimate?" Stephen A asked, his voice dangerously calm. "I'm suggesting that if she didn't look a certain way, if she didn't have the perfect backstory, if she didn't check all the marketing boxes, we wouldn't be dedicating half our show to her every single day." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a split second, no one moved. Then Stephen A's expression hardened. "We'll be right back after this break." The co-host jumped in quickly. As soon as the cameras cut away, chaos erupted in the studio. The producer rushed onto the set headset, still on, gesturing frantically to the floor manager. "What the hell was that?" Stephen A demanded, pulling off his microphone. "Did you just say what I think you said?" Tom stood up, knocking his chair back. "I said what everyone's thinking but is too afraid to say. This whole thing is a marketing ploy, and you know it." "That's not analysis," Stephen A shot back, his voice rising. "That's jealousy, that's bitterness, and it has no place on this show." The producer stepped between them. "Both of you, cool down. Tom, you need to step off set right now. We're restructuring the rest of the show." As Tom was escorted off the set, his phone was already buzzing nonstop in his pocket. The clip had been captured by viewers and was spreading across social media like wildfire. ESPN drama was trending within minutes. In the control room, executives watched the unfolding disaster with horror. One picked up a phone and dialed the network president's direct line. "Sir, we have a situation," she said grimly. "You're going to want to see this right away." By the time the commercial break ended, Tom was gone from the studio, and Stephen A had composed himself enough to continue the show. But the damage was done. What had started as a routine sports debate had turned into something much uglier, and the consequences were just beginning. Stephen A barely made it through the rest of the show. Though he maintained his professional demeanor on camera, everyone in the studio could feel the anger radiating from him. As soon as the final segment ended and the camera stopped rolling, he stormed off the set without speaking to anyone. He went straight to his private office, closed the door, and took several deep breaths. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, but he ignored them all. What Tom had said wasn't just unprofessional, it was everything Stephen A had fought against throughout his career. After 20 minutes of pacing and gathering his thoughts, he checked his messages. Dozens of texts from colleagues, friends, and industry contacts lit up his screen. His social media notifications had exploded into the thousands. Most expressed support for him and outrage at Tom's comments. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. The network's head of talent relations, Paul Chen, entered, looking stressed. "It's bad out there," he said without preamble. "The clip is everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, sports blogs, everyone's talking about it." Stephen A nodded grimly. "What's the network's position?" "That's what I came to discuss. There's an emergency meeting in the president's office. In 15 minutes, they want you there." As Stephen A walked through the hallways toward the executive floor, he noticed people huddled around monitors and smartphones, watching replays of the incident. Conversations stopped when they saw him, replaced by sympathetic nods or encouraging Thumbs up. The president's corner office was already packed when Stephen A. arrived. Network executives filled the large conference table, with additional chairs brought in for legal counsel and public relations staff. The atmosphere was tense, faces grave. "Stephen A., thank you for joining us," the network president said, gesturing to an empty chair. "I wish it were under better circumstances." The head of public relations spoke first, pulling up a presentation on the room's main screen. "The situation is developing rapidly. In the last hour, we've received over 10,000 comments across our platforms, not counting direct calls to the network. Major sponsors have started reaching out with concerns about their brand association." He clicked to the next slide, showing screenshots of various social media posts. The public reaction is overwhelmingly negative toward Tom's comments. Several prominent players, both current and former, have issued statements condemning what was said. The head of legal stepped in next. "From a liability standpoint, the comments open us up to significant issues. They could be interpreted as discriminatory and create a hostile work environment. We need to take decisive action quickly." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the network president, who looked directly at Stephen A. "Before we make any final decisions, I want to hear your thoughts." "Stephen A., you were there. You've worked with Tom. What's your take on all this?" Stephen A. took a moment to gather his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was measured but filled with conviction. "What happened today goes beyond a difference of opinion about basketball. This wasn't analysis. It wasn't even controversy for rating's sake. What Tom said undermines everything this network claims to stand for: respect, integrity, and fair evaluation of athletes based on their performance, not their appearance or marketability." He leaned forward, making eye contact with everyone around the table. "I've built my career on strong opinions. I've criticized players, coaches, and teams when I felt it was deserved. But I've always based those criticisms on what happens on the court or field. What Tom did today was different. He questioned a young athlete's legitimacy not because of her play, but because of who she is." The president nodded slowly. "What would you do if you were in my position?" Stephen A. didn't hesitate. "I'd make it clear that this network doesn't tolerate that kind of commentary. Not just with a statement, but with action." "You mean termination?" the president said. It wasn't a question. "I do, and I need to be completely honest with all of you." Stephen A. straightened in his chair. "Either he goes or I go. I won't sit at the same table with someone who tears down athletes out of personal jealousy or bias. I can't be part of a network that allows that kind of behavior." The room fell silent again. Stephen A. Smith was the network's biggest star, the face of their sports coverage, and the driver behind their highest-rated shows. Everyone knew he wasn't bluffing. The head of legal cleared his throat. "From a contractual standpoint, we have clear grounds for termination based on violation of our code of conduct and ethics policies." "What about the potential blowback?" asked one executive. "Some viewers might see this as an overreaction, maybe even as censorship." The PR director shook her head. "Based on initial public response, the greater risk is in not taking strong enough action. Major sports figures are already calling for consequences. Several women's sports organizations have issued statements. The longer we wait, the worse this gets." The president looked around the room, then back at Stephen A. "You're certain about this? No warnings, no suspensions?" "Some lines can't be uncrossed," Stephen A. replied firmly. "This is one of them." After a moment's consideration, the president nodded. "Draw up the paperwork," he told the legal team. "We'll issue a statement within the hour." As the meeting broke up, the president asked Stephen A. to stay behind. When they were alone, he spoke more candidly. "You know this will create a storm, right? No matter how justified, firing someone for comments made on air will draw criticism from certain quarters." Stephen A. stood his ground. "I've faced criticism my entire career. I can handle it. What I can't handle is staying silent when someone uses our platform to delegitimize an athlete's achievements based on anything other than their performance. That's not who I am, and it's not what this network should be." The president extended his hand. "I respect your position. We'll back you on this." As Stephen A. left the office, he checked his phone again. Among the flood of messages was a text from an unexpected source, Caitlin Clark herself. "Thank you for standing up for what's right," it read simply. He took a deep breath, pocketed his phone, and headed back to his office to prepare for tomorrow's show. The decision had been made. Now came the hard part, facing the public and explaining why one of their colleagues was suddenly gone. News travels fast in the sports world, but this story moved at lightning speed. By late afternoon, ESPN released a brief statement announcing Tom Wilson's immediate termination. The statement cited comments inconsistent with the network's values and standards without going into specific details. Within minutes, sports websites, blogs, and social media accounts lit up with the news. The original clip of Tom's comments, already viral, now spread with renewed energy alongside the announcement of his firing. ESPN firing and Cocker Stephen stands trended nationwide. Tom himself learned of his termination through a phone call from HR, followed by an official email detailing the terms of his separation. He sat in his apartment blindsided by the swiftness of it all. Though he'd known he'd crossed a line, he hadn't expected such immediate and final consequences. That evening, he posted a statement on his social media. "My comments were taken out of context and don't reflect my true feelings about women's basketball. I apologize to anyone who was offended, but stand by my right to question the media's coverage decisions." The half-hearted apology only added fuel to the fire. Basketball fans and commentators across the spectrum dissected his original comments and his response, with most finding both sorely lacking. Meanwhile, across town, Stephen A. spent the evening, preparing for what would be one of the most important broadcasts of his career. He knew all eyes would be on him the next morning, expecting him to address what had happened. The pressure was enormous, but after decades in the business, pressure was something Stephen A. had learned to embrace. As dawn broke the following day, the ESPN studios buzzed with unusual energy. Security had been increased after several threats were received overnight. Extra production staff had been called in to handle what everyone expected would be record viewership numbers. In the makeup chair, Stephen A. reviewed his notes one last time. He'd written and rewritten his opening remarks deep into the night, understanding the weight his words would carry. This wasn't just about one incident or one person. It was about the culture of sports commentary and what kind of discourse was acceptable. 5 minutes before airtime, the network president stopped by. "You ready for this?" he asked. Stephen A. nodded. "Been ready my whole career." When the familiar first take theme played and the cameras went live, viewers saw Stephen A. sitting alone at the desk. The usual vibrant studio seemed quieter, more serious. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady and measured. "Before we get to today's sports news, I need to address what happened on yesterday's show. Those of you who watch this show regularly know that I've built my career on honest, sometimes controversial opinions. I believe in calling things as I see them. I believe in passionate debate. But what happened yesterday crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed in sports commentary or anywhere else." Stephen A. folded his hands on the desk in front of him. "We can disagree about players, about games, about strategies. That's what makes sports talk interesting. That's why people tune in. But when criticism comes from a place of jealousy or resentment rather than analysis, that crosses a line. When comments question an athlete's legitimacy based on anything other than their performance, that crosses a line. In case I'm not being clear enough, let me say this plainly. Caitlin Clark is receiving attention because she's an extraordinary basketball player doing extraordinary things on the court. Period. Her success isn't about marketing or image. It's about 36-point triple-doubles and no-look passes that leave defenders spinning. It's about bringing new fans to the game through excellence." The studio remained silent as he continued. "As many of you know, ESPN has parted ways with the analyst who made those comments. This wasn't a decision about silencing different viewpoints. This was about upholding basic standards of professionalism and respect. Throughout my career, I've criticized plenty of athletes, both men and women. I've questioned coaching decisions, front office moves, and player performances. I'll continue to do so when I believe it's warranted. But I've always based those Criticisms on what happens between the lines, not on who the player is off the court. Stephen A. then shifted gears slightly, his tone becoming more reflective. You know, when I started in this business, women's sports barely got any coverage at all. Athletes were putting up incredible performances in near-empty arenas with no cameras present. They were breaking records that nobody reported. They were changing the game in ways that went unrecognized. Today, we're finally starting to see that change. We're finally giving these athletes the platform they deserve. And yes, that means sometimes we talk about Caitlin Clark for 10 minutes instead of 5. That means sometimes her highlights lead the show, not because of some agenda, but because what she's doing is legitimately newsworthy, because what she's doing deserves to be seen. He leaned forward slightly, his passion building. If that bothers you, I have to ask, why? Why does it bother you to see an athlete get recognition for excellence? Why does it bother you when we celebrate someone breaking barriers and bringing new energy to the sport we all love? After a moment's pause, Stephen A. straightened in his chair. Now, let's get back to sports. Today we're welcoming a new voice to our panel. The camera pulled back to reveal a woman sitting beside him. Lisa Johnson, a former basketball star with an impressive career both on the court and in basketball analysis. I'm thrilled to introduce Lisa Johnson, who will be joining our team permanently. Lisa brings 15 years of professional playing experience and sharp analytical skills to our coverage. We're lucky to have her perspective. Lisa smiled and thanked Stephen A. before they smoothly transitioned into the day's sports stories. In the weeks that followed, the controversy gradually faded from headlines, though its impact remained. Tom attempted to rebuild his career with appearances on smaller networks and a podcast, but found little traction in an industry that had largely moved on without him. Caitlin Clark continued breaking records and drawing unprecedented crowds. When asked about the incident in interviews, she consistently redirected the conversation to basketball, refusing to let one person's bitter comments define her story. As for Stephen A., his principled stand earned him respect, even from those who had previously criticized his bombastic style. Ratings for First Take climbed higher than ever, and ESPN executives privately acknowledged that backing Stephen A. had been not just the right ethical choice, but also the right business decision. The incident became a turning point in sports media, a moment when an industry often criticized for its treatment of women's sports had drawn a clear line in the sand. It wasn't perfect and challenges remained, but something fundamental had shifted. A new standard had been set, one that demanded athletes be judged by their performance rather than their persona, regardless of gender, and that, perhaps, was the most important victory of all.